Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk, 888-589-8840. We're talking about the formula for happiness. I want to get back to phone calls and close the loop on Arthur Brooks' column. Couple of quick factoids for you. Here's how you do it in Colorado. Remember, the shooter was against any kind of gun laws. I mean, he was, I keep saying that backwards. He was against he was against the Second Amendment. I keep putting it the wrong way. He was for gun laws. He was for strict gun control. That was what he was for. And he was against the Republicans because they were for a loosening of gun restrictions. Now, here's how you do it. 54 of the 62 sheriffs in Colorado, they're simply going to refuse to enforce the new gun laws. There are these very restrictive gun laws in Colorado, and they're saying we're not going to enforce them. It's going to be, quote, a very low priority for enforcement. Where did they get that idea? Well, they got it from Barack Obama. He can hardly complain when he's made enforcement of marijuana laws, immigration laws, a very low priority, along with his own health care law. By the way, Ted Cruz, third most influential leader in the world behind Pope Francis and Barack Obama. Not bad for a wacko bird. And you look at this list of the most influential person in the world, John McCain, not anywhere on that list. Talking about Christmas for a second, the news stories, this is a 2-year study done by our friends at Newsbusters Media Research Center. The networks in 2 years, the last 2 years, ran 527 stories about Christmas in their nightly news broadcast. You know how many of them mentioned Christ? Out of 527 stories about Christmas, you know how many of them mentioned Jesus Christ? 7. That's 1.3%. And one last item on the whole business of whether Santa and St. Nicholas are white. According to the Census Bureau, our own Census Bureau, Arabs and Jews and Europeans are all white. So St. Nicholas was white and Jesus is white. He was a Jew, but that's considered for the purposes of the census, for the purposes of anthropology, that's considered white. There's only 3 or 4 major races on the planet, according to anthropologists, and Caucasians is one of those, Caucasoids, and that includes the Arabs and the Jews and the Europeans. So St. Nicholas and Jesus, in fact, were, according to our own Census Bureau, they were white. Now let's go back to the phones, talking about this happiness business. What's your formula for happiness? Why are conservative women and men so much happier than liberal women and men? Let's go to Paul in Tomball, Texas. Paul, welcome. What's on your mind?
Thanks, Brian. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Well, my formula for happiness is I have 3 mottos that I live with. And the first thing is that I know 3 things for sure, absolutely, without a doubt. A, there is a God. B, I'm not it. And C, he loves everybody the same way he loves me.
Mm-hmm.
And my second motto is the only real freedom any man can have is doing what he ought to do because he wants to do it.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that, Paul. You know, and it lines up with what Arthur Brooks says here. This is what he says. It turns out that choosing, and you mentioned 2 of these 4 right here, it turns out that choosing to pursue 4 basic values. Here's the formula for happiness, to pursue these 4 basic values. First of all, faith. And Paul, that's what you were talking about. Pursuing a relationship with God, being right with God. That's number 1. Pursuing faith, pursuing family. That is giving yourself to your wives or to your husbands and to your children. That is value number 2. Getting involved in your community and work. That's the interesting thing. 4th thing is a key component of happiness is work. Now, for a woman, it might be making a home for her husband and for her family. That's where she works. That's where her creativity goes. That's where innovation is expressed. That's where her personality is expressed. That's where her work and her talent and her energy go. For her husband, it might be out there, slaying dragons in the world. But regardless, work is a central component of happiness. And that's the last thing you were talking about there, Paul, kind of pursuing the thing that God has called you to do and doing it because you want to.
That's right. So. And the third thing is the key to life is gratitude, but the key to happiness is acceptance and forgiveness. And those are the keys my mottos that I live life by. And of course, Jesus Christ is the reason that I am grateful and that I live life the way I do. But as for why I believe that liberals aren't happy is I believe that they have chosen paths that they haven't chosen paths, but they've been given paths by their mentors, by their liberal mentors, however it happened. through the family they grew up in, through school, education, and they're not really making choices for themselves, much less they're just accepting what is put on the plate for them.
Well, and it is interesting. You look at, you look at liberals and their value system. And again, I'm not going to say this is true of all liberals. I'm not trying to generalize here, but it's true of a lot of liberals, certainly. And it may, be tied into what we're talking about. Paul, you were just talking about the importance of, of a relationship with God. Well, what did the liberals do at the Democratic Party convention? They voted God out of the building. They voted God out of their party. Now, there were a lot of Democrats in that room that voted for God, but it was clear that the majority didn't want God to have anything to do with the Democratic Party or the Democratic Party platform. They wanted him to take a hike right out of that building. And the issues of family, one of the things you see about, and I'm not saying liberals can't be devoted to their families. A lot of them are, so please don't misunderstand me. But, when I'm around conservatives, what you find is they are committed to their families. Family is a very, very extremely high priority for them, virtually across the board. Now, that's true for a lot of liberals. I'm not saying it's not true for any of them. Please don't misunderstand me. But, you think of a lot of liberals, they're not into having children. If they're married at all, they're into having no children to save the planet or not to interfere with their lifestyle or whatever. So they're just not as family-oriented as conservatives are. A lot of them don't even get married because they don't want to be tied down or whatever they, think about marriage. And, of course, homosexuals, by definition, are unable to procreate. They're unable to conceive children together out of their love and raise those children. So they don't have that bond, and that's an enormous source of happiness for the American people. All right, Paul, well, listen, that's a great call. Thank you very much for that. So interesting, again, to see these formula for happiness. It involves pursuing faith, family, community, and work. And the work, it's interesting that work is on that list. We tend to think of work as drudgery, but Arthur Brooks says no. Having meaningful labor to be involved in, that's absolutely central to being a happy individual. All right, 888-589-8840. We had this, let me play a couple of sound bites. Let's shift gears, talk a little bit about Obamacare because we got some updates there. And very quickly, what's going on with health care is a couple of lead stories on this subject. Number one, we talked about this a bit on Friday, but the Obama administration and Democrats in general are in a complete full-blown panic over Obamacare. And one of the reasons they're in a panic is there's 50 to 60,000 of these paper applications. Remember, President Obama said, yeah, the website's cobbed up, so fill it out on paper and get it to us and everything will be fine. These applications haven't been processed. There's 50 to 60,000 of them sitting around. I'm not even sure if people know where they are. They haven't been processed. And they have to be processed. The information has got to go to the insurers. The insurers have to get their money from the person that filled out. There's no way that's going to happen by December 23rd. So you got 50 to 60,000 of these paper forms that Obama told people to fill out. They're stuck in limbo somewhere. There are 15,000 of the online forms at a minimum where the information did not get to the insurers. And that's only one of the three problems. Some of those forms that do get to the insurers have missing information. They have duplicate information. They have inaccurate information, and they're virtually useless to the insured. So President Obama's come out and said, okay, I'm going to order health insurance companies, and if you don't comply with this, we're going to take you completely off of the exchange. You have to cover people with insurance even though they haven't paid for it. You have to provide insurance to people who have not paid for it. That's what they're doing. That's what they're saying. These people are not going to have insurance because there's no way to get through this thicket. So if they had it with you before, you got to extend it at least through the end of January. Even if they haven't paid for the new policy, you haven't seen a dime of their money, they get hit by a bus on January 1 and they've got no insurance. You have to cover them. If you don't, we are taking you off of the healthcare exchange. Now, here's what Charles Krauthammer, clip number 2, here's what Charles Krauthammer had to say about what's really at stake in this whole Obamacare debate.
One point, one sentence. The issue isn't whether you care about or you have compassion about the insurers. They deserve everything that they have gotten. The issue is, do you want to live in a country where the federal government controls all of medicine, all of healthcare, which is exactly where we are now. And that's what's wrong with Obamacare, and we're seeing it in spades every day as it orders the insurers around.
And George Will, clip number 3, George Will added to this, and this is what Krauthammer says, look, this is the basic issue. Do we want the government to be in charge of healthcare and medicine? I've got a story from the UK, again, where government medicine goes, 450,000 elderly people dying of thirst in the UK because nobody was there to take care of them. And you got all these elderly now are being bumped out of the healthcare system because they're just considered too old and they don't qualify. They've changed the restrictions. So elderly people now are completely deprived of healthcare whatsoever because they've got to trim somewhere because government-run healthcare just cannot sustain itself. So here is George Will talking about what's going on with these willy-nilly changing of rules on the fly.
We have a great sense this week again of them making it up as they go along. It's kind of government by teenagers, and we've instituted a new phrase this week, which is retroactive coverage. And it goes like this, I gather. You lose your coverage under Obamacare because you had a substandard plan from a lemon, whatever they call them, insurance company. And you may have enrolled, but you may not have sent your premium in. So on January 1st, hungover from a night of celebrating the end of 2013, you've come down the stairs and you break your leg. Now what do? Are you covered or are you not? There's a great fear that there's going to be a wave all across the country of people who have fallen into this hole where they have either not paid or not at all, and the companies are asked to pretend that they've been paid the premiums. This is retroactive coverage.
And it's a complete and utter and total disaster. I mean, the government simply has no authority to order a private company to provide a good or a service at their own expense. They've got no right to do that. So President Obama is basically asking the health insurance companies to eat his colossal ineptitude. This is epic, gigantic, historical ineptitude, and he's trying to force the insurers to cover his gigantic failure. Focal point in the FR Talk.